Hi guys, welcome back to the lab, this time with a purely mechanical episode. It's about my Cannondale Profit SL and a complete disassembly of the Lefty fork and doing a basic service on it and just cleaning everything up. Which is something I didn't find on YouTube so far, so I hope this helps someone. See, the whole fork strut is not in. I just took it out. These bearings, they feel pretty good, so I leave them as they are. But the Lefty definitely needed some cleaning. Generally speaking, I'm really amazed by the quality head shocks and Lefties have. I mean, this is a fork which is over a decade old, and I had really rusty screws on it as I bought this used. So I knew it was treated really badly, was probably standing in the rain for weeks, but still the insides of that fork look awesome, like nearly new. So I will not replace anything except the shock oil. So here you see all the parts lying around. This is the main tube, right? Where you see inside the surfaces where these bearing guides will come in. And here we have the damper. Now, first to the tools. First to the tools you will need. One special tool you will need, I have made it myself here, but maybe you're just gonna buy it. It's the head shock crown nut tool. On the top of the damper you see these 4 slots, and this is a tool I've made that fit into these 4 slots, more or less, to unscrew it, right? I took a fork from one of these micro scooters, because this is 1/8 diameter steering tube, I think, or it's 1 inch, but I think it's 1/8. Yeah, it's 1/8 steering tube, and then I just took the angle grinder and cut out these 4 studs that will then go into the nut. And you also need that slot, because you need to insert it around the damper tube like this. But however, Google for head shock tool, this is absolutely needed. You cannot work without that. Or at least I wouldn't recommend it. Second special tool you could need, but I didn't, was just a set of angled pliers like these ones to unscrew the top of the damper. And the rest is basically a set of Allen keys. Then what I also needed, where did it go? Was a 40mm key in order to unscrew the bottom nut. But this basically, you could do it that way too, if you like it rough. It's certainly gonna leave traces on your head shock, but on your Lefty. But if you think that it's an old Lefty anyway and you just want to save it, this is the way to go, because that's sufficient. I have disassembled and reassembled this Lefty for about 10 times now to figure out how it works. Now I can tell you how. So it is useful to have a vise like this one, with soft jaws, so you can firmly grip it but not scratch it. And of course, don't overdo it. It is a sensitive piece of hardware, so you should not squeeze that one too much. First thing to do is take off these zip ties to be able to move the booth. The lower one, I mean, you can leave it or you can remove it as you want, and then you can open it up. After you have removed the booth, you will need a 40mm key, which is usually, you have them for the old headsets, that's where I have it from. And yeah, so you need to unscrew this big nut here. And then here you see the ends of the rails, of the outer rails of this linear bearing, and you see this ring going all around it, holding these in place so they can't move. And to remove this ring you need to go first all in. You go as far in as you can, because then you can push them in a little bit. You have to push two at the same time. Push it in and pull the ring out at the same time, and do that all around until that ring comes off. You also want to, the ring is quite loose, so if you want to unhook this one, you have to push the ring up. That gives you a little bit more room, and then once you have two, the third one is easy, and the fourth one should also go, but the fourth one gets a bit tricky because then the ring is inclined. Yeah, so that was the fourth one. Now you're ready to pull the whole thing out. Now you see the needle bearings coming, the needle cages holding the needles in place. And now be careful, because at about this point, now it's all out. Now it comes. Okay? That's the point. And be careful with these needle cages. I broke some already. They are very gentle because they are not intended to bear high loads. They're just to keep the needles in place. Now to reassemble the damper. There is a tiny little screw on the side here, which was probably to fill in the oil or remove the oil, I'm not sure. Remove this first if you want to take this apart. Remove this one first, because I had air pressure which had built up inside the oil chamber, because just below the oil chamber is the air chamber. And so if you have compressed air in here, over the time it will seep into the oil, and actually the oil will seep down too. So you will have oil in the air chamber and air in the oil chamber, and so the oil chamber tends to be pressurized with air. So remove the little screw, let the air out before you open up the big ones, because if you open the big one and you have pressure on it, it will pop out and will make a huge mess. I haven't taken apart the whole piston stuff in here. I just leave it as it is, because that is very complex and it's something I did not touch. Now I carefully insert it back into the tube. Careful about the piston rings on the first piston, that you don't get these somewhere stuck. Oh. That little screw on the side needs to be out, I see. It needs to be out to properly insert the piston, or it will touch. So carefully insert the piston. The second piston has an O-ring, so you need to push a little bit. So now the second piston is in. Now the top cover, it goes in very easily. It goes out very easily too, because it's a plastic part inside the nicely anodized aluminium surface. So just by pushing with your fingers on it, you can screw it quite far. And To put it in or to take it out, I have used some pliers. As you see, I have wrapped them a little bit with some tape. It's because if I touch here the smooth surface on the damper, I don't want to scratch it. Actually, it looks like I have already scratched it slightly. I hope that's not gonna hurt too much. So now I can tighten it and just tighten it until it bottoms out. No need to apply high torque. Then turn the whole thing around and start to fill in oil. I use a syringe because that's an easy way to do it. Keep the piston in the lowest position when you do so. Then you have a high volume to fill above the piston with oil. As soon as you see the oil from the top and it's nearly full, move the piston up and down a bit. Oh! Don't forget the tiny little screw down here before you fill in oil. Because of course it's not going to be tight if the little screw is not in. It's not going to be easy to put in the little screw if you have already oil on top. Okay, now tiny little screw is in. Move the piston up. Oh, the oil comes out. Check that you don't have it in lockout position when you fill it again, because that's not gonna simplify the task. So it should be unlocked now. Let me check. Much better. Yeah. Now when moving the piston up and down, don't move it above the oil surface, wherever your oil surface is, because if you move it above the oil surface, you will get air under the cylinder, which you want to avoid, under the piston. So move the piston just up a little bit and a little bit down, and then the oil bubbles, the air bubbles should already be coming out. More oil. I add oil just to the limit of the thread. Actually, this is already a bit high, because if you look at the cap, the O-ring is below the end of the thread, but I think that's, for me, reasonable. It will squeeze out a little bit of oil when I screw it, but that ensures me that I have nearly no air bubbles in it. Now, second cap. The one, yeah, holes on the top, O-ring on the bottom. Put that one in. And you can really screw it in with your fingers nearly all the way down. And then again the tuned angled pliers. Okay, so now it is in. Let's clean everything up properly. And you should hear no air bubbles. I hear maybe one or two tiny little bubbles, but I'm pretty happy with the result. And moving up and down, you should of course also have no oil leaking out. So now this is our damper. It is again filled with new oil, freshly filled and completely full, because as I took it off, as I told you, there was air inside and oil had leaked out to the bottom. Air has leaked in, so it was about half full. So now this is again ready to go into actually this part here. It goes in like this, but in the very last. So that's actually the first thing you do, is unscrew this connection from the top. Down here goes another piston. It's the air piston actually. This is the air piston assembly act. Two O-rings go back on this. Just took them off to inspect them and they looked pretty fine. These two O-rings here are the O-rings of the air chamber, so these are very important. If you're losing air, it is probably because of these two. So check these. Now this now goes in first, down here. Make sure you have the air valve removed at the bottom, or you will not be able to push that one in, right? Okay, now we have the spring assembly that goes in. That spring assembly consists of a series of parts. We have on the end of the spring we have such plastic bearings, kind of. In the middle we have a space between the spring and the tube. It goes about to the middle of the spring, so this avoids that the spring bends out sideways. And to keep that little thing in the middle, there are two O-rings again, and then another spacer, another O-ring. So then you have to put in the spring, which basically is two end caps that center the spring on the rod, plus two plastic bushings, which have, originally it was an O-ring, a bushing, two O-rings, a bushing, and then again an O-ring, that keep that bushing in the middle. I think this is to avoid that the spring bends and then touches the soft aluminium rod in the middle. One of these O-rings was broken, and so now I have O-ring, bushing, O-ring, bushing, O-ring. I think it's gonna be fine. But that's basically how it is assembled. In the end, for me, it's the total confusion. I don't understand why this spring was in my Lefty. Because it is in series with the air spring, and it led to the fact that the air spring was compressing this one a bit, and so that I had about 2 centimeters, 20 millimeters of travel where I had no spring pushing out. It's the coil spring that removes the air piston from the bottom of the damper, and so you have some room where it's not properly going out. And having a coil spring and an air spring in series is not logical to me. It doesn't make any sense. So I just totally removed the coil spring, and just I'm running with the air spring and the oil damper, and that's it. Yeah. So maybe if you are from Cannondale and you know or remember how a Lefty 110 looks inside officially, because maybe I just got this fork second hand by someone who had modified it and it was not original. I have no idea. But if you can tell me how it looked originally, and what is the thoughts behind, dear Cannondale, tell me. And if someone else has this fork and knows that, please tell me too. Leave a comment below and let's discuss that. But for me, I have just an air piston, an oil piston, that's it. But I think it's already helpful to you to see a little bit how it looks inside, how I disassembled it, how I reassembled it. So that's why I'm posting this online. Use at your own risk. Use your own brain. It's just some inputs I give you here, right? It's not a perfect instruction. And I am not a Cannondale certified technician at all. I'm just a mechanical engineer using my brain to try to understand things. These notches where the ring comes in should be aligned with the end of the tube. Now if you want to insert it, it helps if these guides are a little bit out, because then you can bend them slightly out to get in the bearings. But make sure they are not too far out, because it's very hard to push them back in later on. If I have them about here, I know that later I can push them in with the nut. I will show you. And getting these nasty things to hold in place is really annoying. But it gives me an idea of what we could be doing. So take just a piece of kitchen paper, ideally, something that doesn't make you too much fibers, of course. So now this thing will, I hope, hold them in place, but be careful to push it back enough, because you need at least that much of free space in here. So now these won't move. Just learned a new trick. Nice. Now since I have cleaned out all the grease, I'll add more grease in here just to be sure, and I mean that's gonna be pushed in. These are lined and are slightly more out than they should, but far enough that if I put the nut over it, it will catch the thread and I can use the nut to push them in. After dropping these needle cages several times into the dirt of my workshop, because of course it's a workshop, not a hospital, so it's dirty, I realized I need some help. And the idea I had was I took from an old inner tube, I just cut off a slice, which gives me a rubber band which has just about the right diameter. And what I'm gonna do now is shove these onto it and hope they will be just holding somehow in place until I have finished the assembly, and then I can cut it off. Now of course with two it worked, third one gets a bit tight. Let's get Mr. Screwdriver to help us a bit here. Number 3, last but not least, number 4. So, now you see I have them pre-aligned already. Now, I have made 2 markings, right? The front marking should be the back end of these bearings, and so I have to push all this forward to that point. Now try to have them all perfectly aligned. Alignment is key here, because each misalignment you get, in the end you will lose travel in your fork. Okay, now, and then sitting on a chair, because last time I was bent over, so that was not a good idea. It hurt my back and it didn't help the precision of my movements. Now, very carefully try to get all 4 needle cages into this. Rock it back and forth in all directions slightly. Rotate it a bit, left, right, just to have them all aligned. Remember, that's a taper here. You need to have them the right way around or you will not get them in. Now we have reached the point where it starts to get harder to push in, because now we have the compression. The trick here is to have a slight rotation at the end and rock it in needle by needle. Fuck! Abort! I lost one of my guides here. Ah! See, these, I mean, once they are compressed, they are not sliding anymore. But as long as they are not, they tend to slide in and out as they like. That's not what we want. My solution to this is add more grease. Add more grease as it makes everything stick. And keep an eye if they are going away, or maybe I should just leave a bit more reserve out and then try to push them in the last minute before they start to get too compressed to be moved. To have the alignment, I watch these 2 textures. They should be on the same plane, which I did wrong last time. which for you is good because now you get this video because I had to take the whole thing apart a second time. So, okay, now we have reached the point where the bearings are in and the stuff holds. Now I try to push them in a bit more because at the end I need them in, just don't want to lose them. So that's a bit the dilemma I have. Now it's in. Can I? No, I can't. Damn it. See, now it's a bit the issue that I cannot push them further in. But I have a trick for that. Nevertheless, remove the rubber first. Now it's in. It's always rolling a bit hard in the beginning when you still have a lot of grease in between, but after a few movements it will become better. Cutting off this one. Now something I noticed that works, maybe protect that one a bit here. Is to hammer them in slightly. Like that. I use this one because I know it's the softer material than I had on the that I have here. This is hardened steel, this is rather mild steel, so I think that will do it. Okay, now last one. Now you see this bearing here and this one are still out while the others are in, so this is a misalignment. This is already not good. But we'll try to fix that later. But, oh wait, the misalignment could be fixed by pushing these ones in. They will roll. They will roll with it. Now, of course, that ring is somewhere in here. Here it is. Now push it in, because if you push it in, you can move these, right? If it's out, the needles are all out, then you don't have the flexibility needed. Now push this one in, this one over it, and again you need to have at least two to get started. Then the number 3. Yeah, now the first one has clicked. And number 4. And it's clicked in. And now it's still not perfectly aligned. But you should be far in enough that this thread catches it. And yeah, we're pretty far already. What I do now, because I don't want to put too much stress on these bearings and stuff, what I do is I tighten it until I feel some resistance, and then I go one movement in out, because then the stress you put on the front of these rails pushing them in gets rolled back with the needles, and you'll feel after one movement you can turn a bit further, and then you do maybe 2 movements too, and then you can tighten it a bit more, then move it, tighten, move, tighten. I'm hitting the bottom. You'll feel it when you are at the end of the thread, and that's the moment when everything is fine. Then, just for fun, add a bit more grease here. Of course, I had tested this for leaks. It is still perfectly fine after over a decade, so I'm very happy about this. Yeah, this procedure is of course needed if you want to change the booth. So, and now what we absolutely should not forget. Not sure if you see it. Still have the paper down here. Yeah, too short. The paper I had put in to hold the guides in place. That one. That one needs to go out, of course. And now we are ready for installing the damper unit and the spring. And now that I have pre-tightened it by hand, it should be maybe 1 or 2 more turns to properly put it in. And the trick I also learned doing this is don't move the tool, move the tube, because the tool, my tool, tends to slide off the nuts. So if I turn down here, it's much easier to keep things together. We cannot put that one on now, because we first need to insert it into the fork. Pull out the lower part and keep this pushing in, so you're flush here. That's a safe way to protect all this during the assembly into the fork, into the bridge. These here are quite flexible, so you can open them up a little bit if it's needed. Have all the screws out, because even the screw, if it's loosened and inside, it will hinder the free movement that you need to insert it properly. Check that this nose goes into the slot. Again, gently rocking it back and forth always helps a bit. And here it goes. Don't forget that bumper that goes over it. Now I have to push from the bottom, then make this hole stick out. So, time to add the screws again. These 2 shells up here. Then there's such plastic ring, probably to seal it, up here. I use a cloth because everything is greasy, so I can tighten it by hand as far as it goes. Now officially this is the same pattern than you have on some bottom brackets, so if you have the bottom bracket tool to match it, of course use that one. If not, there's the brute force method, and you don't need to tighten it too much anyway. Now comes the lockout lever. Locked, unlocked, locked, unlocked. That's good. After the lockout lever comes a nut. The lower one, be careful not to over tighten the lower one. If you over tighten it, the lockout mechanism will not work anymore. You just slightly tighten it Oh look, it's even still quite loose, but that doesn't matter because it's just to it will be held in place as soon as you tighten the upper nut, right? And the upper one is 10 millimeters. It's a fine pitched thread, so all fine pitched threads have a tendency to cross thread, so be careful. Tightening by finger is always a good idea because then you feel if it's properly on it. So now it's on the thread and now it's tightened. And open, close, open, close. Nice. Now put the adjustment knob on it. Verify that the flat surface is aligned with the tiny screw and tighten the tiny screw with tiny hex key. Here we go. Thanks for watching. If you like other technical stuff, follow my channel. It's not only about mountain biking, it's quite diverse. And see you later. Bye bye.